All right, so I want to talk about tools and what tools I think are helpful. And, I'll give you my honest opinion of whether you actually have to have them or you don't have to have them, or, you can get by. There's so many things you can get by just with things around the house that you already have. So don't feel like you have to run out and spend a whole bunch of money, right? Because if you're growing this garden, you're growing it because you're trying to save some money or for enjoyment, you don't have a lot of money. Don't feel like you need to go out and get a whole bunch of stuff to be successful, because you don't. But let's talk about some things. Inputs into the soil. Without soil fertility, not much is going to happen. So you're going to need some type of inputs. If you have neighbors that have horses, that's great. You get some horse manure or some other type of manure. If you're making compost, that's great. There's free sources of inputs, but they're not necessarily free because there's a lot of backbreaking work with it. Right? It's very, very hard. It's always cheaper to buy a bag of organic fertilizer than to put in the work. Right? If you don't want to do that work and you want to spend a little money on it, then a few bags of fertilizer is going to go a long way. Maybe some pelleted chicken manure or some seaweed dust is always good. Feather meal, something like that you can put on the beds when you're planting, is really going to go a long way. You're really going to get your money's worth out of something like that. You're going to get bigger vegetables, less disease, and it's going to pay back tenfold, if not 100-fold. Now, in starting plants, you just need containers to start plants in, or like a soil block system if you're going to use soil blocks, which is a method of compressing soil into blocks. That's a very cheap way to do it, but you do need containers to put those blocks into. It's a little tricky, it's time consuming, but it is one way to do it. But you can also use, egg cartons. You can use old milk cartons to make pots, right? You don't necessarily have to buy the stuff. You can get, when people throw away a lot of the six-packs where they buy vegetables at the local garden supply, you can use those. There really is no rule that you can't use that stuff. It's going to work perfectly fine. And as you get more advanced and you want to use something that's long-lasting, there are trays that last forever that you can use that are going to grow a better seedling. And you can always work your way up, but it's not something you necessarily have to start with. And I don't want you to feel like you have to. One thing is crop support, right? Once you're putting these things in the ground, there's certain things that need support, cucumbers and peas and tomatoes. So that's something you want to think about. Maybe you have lumber lying around, you have string lying around, and you can kind of put something together for this year. That's fine. Or you can follow the supports that I do, where you have just a few things from a few big box store that you put together and invest a little bit of money in. But always good to use stuff you already have, and just get creative with it. It's not something you necessarily need. Cultivation. Now, again, you don't have to buy something. You can get away with, putting a wire on a stick with a hose clamp. And as long as you're regular in your cultivation, it's something you could probably get away with. It's very nice to have professional cultivation tools. They do a better job. They do make it more relaxing. They're not the most expensive things, but it's not an absolute requirement. But cultivation is. Keeping your garden weed-free is going to make it really a lot less stressful. It's one of the most important things you can do for the garden. It's keeping it fertile and keeping it weed-free. So having a nice tool is it's about peace of mind, and it's about making things a lot easier. Something to lay out your plantings. Now, I'm going to show you ways in which you can do it with a rake. If you don't have a rake, it doesn't mean you got to buy one, but you can use the rake you have already. You can use old boards to lay things out. It's a garden, so it's not a big deal. And then later on, as your garden grows and you have a really big garden, you can go to more professional things like a gritter. But there are definitely things around the house you can use to do spacing. And I'm going to try to cover those as I go through the vegetable by vegetable. A zipper is a great tool. It's an all-around tool that can be used for seeding, for putting in plantings, for putting in fertilizer. Not required. I'm just trying to think of a tool that is an all-around tool that covers a lot of things. So it might be something to consider. A broad fork. If you have very compacted soil, it's a nice thing to have. It is an expensive tool. It can be a couple $100s, but they do last forever. They will, if you take care of them, you don't pry rocks out of the ground, it could be a forever tool. Get one that's not too heavy. I find the ones that are a bit heavy, especially as you get older, they're a little bit much to be carrying around. But it's a good tool to have to once in a while be at a broad fork and get air into your soil. And as you go better and better and better, a tool that I do like is a tilther, which is a little battery-powered tool that helps take amendments and kind of rake them into the soil. It only goes, an inch or two into the soil, very little. It's I still consider it a no-dig tool. It just makes life a lot easier, and it's a lot easier than pulling a rake around to smooth your beds and to work an amendment. But that is a more expensive tool, and that's sort of at the higher end. All right, so those are just some of my thoughts on what kind of tools you might want to think about. And as we go along, I will talk about them more in depth as I use them and just show them and talk about all your different options.